Greetings, everybody. Welcome to yet another talk from me. It's Saturday, the 8th of March, 2025. I'm here to do another talk on another topic. I've been teaching on biblical prophecy, and I appreciate your viewing of my videos, and I trust that you are enjoying your weekend. I'm going to take a step away from biblical prophecy also this time, just to talk about history. It's my contention that history is a very important subject on several levels. When you're studying the Bible, it's a very good thing to have a sense of history so you can put things into context. So history is very important, and I've got a few examples just to show you where I'm coming from on this. You know, when we sit in the classroom at school, from primary school through to high school, and if we study the subject of history, it's very fact-based. You learn facts just like that, and you don't really see the overall significance and importance of a particular era in history and events. For instance, take for instance the issue of bias and supremacy. It's absent when, for instance, you're sitting in a classroom and you learn about, for instance, let's take for instance the colonies. The concept of colonies is just presented to you as accepted facts, accepted knowledge. So supremacy and bias is absent from it. Arrogancy is absent from it. If you look, for instance, at in the 1800s, the late 1800s, European powers decided to divide Africa amongst themselves. They had a meeting in Berlin, a conference, and they decided to partition Africa according to them. And each country took sections and territories of Africa. But when you look at the Bible, when you study the Bible, like I've done, you afterwards start questioning, but how is it that people could do that without any spiritual and moral conscience in it? It was a matter of the people just overrode other peoples in Africa, took their territories and their resources and took it for themselves, and overlooked the people, the inhabitants there, the indigenous peoples that were in those territories. So when we look at the Bible, that's why I say it's very important to have a sense of history and also to understand the Bible. You'll be able to ask yourself questions, for instance, like the moral and the spiritual side of matters, instead of just taking facts on face value. Another example is, for instance, when the British came to the Cape. It was during the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. They needed to get the Cape under their control because of the French. Napoleon Bonaparte was aggressive in Europe and wanting to take over also the sea lanes. So the British came here and they discovered that the Dutch were here already, another European country or European people that were in control, and they wanted to take control, and they took it over by military means. But the point that I want to make here is that the Dutch people that were here couldn't abide under English law and English customs, especially with regard to the Hottentot peoples and the slaves. So they felt very aggrieved because their economy was based on agriculture and very much on labor, cheap labor from Hottentots and slaves. So what the result is, they went into the hinterland. They left the Cape in huge numbers, large numbers, and went into the hinterland of what became later on South Africa, and they went to establish themselves there so that they are independent of the British and their laws and their customs and their idea towards Hottentots and slaves. So it was about the time also of the freedom of the slaves that was made law, although it wasn't practiced as it ought to have been. The same kind of situation happened in the United States of America, which was not the United States of America at the time. It was certain states, and the northern states were different from the southern states because the southern states were very much reliant on slave labor for their economy, and they came into conflict with the northern states over the freedom of slaves. So hence they went into conflict and eventual civil war, and that the Civil War of America was very brutal and cruel, and it divided people right down to families, etc. That's all in history. But it's a similar situation where conflict was based or came from different practices and opinions towards people of color, people of slavery, and so on. Now, the reason why I'm saying all of this is just to give you an idea of how the moral and the spiritual side of people and nations is practiced as just mere facts, but not really looking at those moral and spiritual sides of things. If you look again also at what happens in the schools, because in the school, people's understanding and awareness of the world around them is coming from the basic education that they receive at school. Here in South Africa, for instance, when the new government came into power, Democratic South Africa, 1994, the idea was that the school history curriculum was very much warped based on Afrikaner narratives in terms of, for instance, the Blood River, for instance, the victory over the Zulus, the Groot Trek, what we call the Great Trek, the Boer Wars of Independence, where the Second Boer War was fought over the same issue, it came down to whether they want to be under British rule or not. And that happened at the turn of the century and was basically over by 1903. And then another thing that we not need to be aware of is that in South Africa, a lot of what happened and what happened right up to the present time was can be traced back to 1948 when the Nationalist Party won the election and came in on the ticket of separate development, which we later called apartheid in South Africa. And again, that caused the suppression and the oppression of the colored, the people of color, the melanated peoples in South Africa. And that is actually why the world is as it is today. And that's why I say the Bible needs to be understood in terms of also the moral and the spiritual side of things, with an understanding and awareness of history. Because, for instance, the Afrikaners perpetrated this policy of apartheid, but somehow the spiritual and the moral side of things was absent. But the Bible was also still relevant at the time. So there's that strange anomaly that we find. So back to the idea of what is happening in the schools. The new government with a new curriculum in history came in to undo that kind of narrative, But unfortunately, in their enthusiasm, I don't think they succeeded in bringing the young people under the awareness of realities of the world as they intended to. They came up with, for instance, what we call source-based history. And source-based history is basically what the students of history at university would be doing in like postgraduate, graduate and postgraduate studies, where they would study the sources, the documents and the different things that we could use to interpret what actually happened in history, and not just mere facts that are dished out by the policymakers. So the source-based history is a very good method of teaching, but I think that to introduce it at primary school level and early grades in high school is a little bit too early. You need to have a basis, a foundation of history, certain facts on which to base your later learning. Um, so I would say that it would have been better to introduce source-based history at senior levels of high school and into, of course, university, graduate studies and postgraduate studies. So I'm saying here that the method is good, but it is introduced too early. What the result is that the objective, in my mind, is not achieved. Where there's a sense and understanding of history as it should be. So, just to conclude, um, an understanding of the Bible is very important, but it's also assisted by a sense of history. So, everybody should have at least a modicum, a foundation of history, so that they can understand elements and concepts that come from the Bible, where it refers to the moral and the spiritual side of things, because you cannot really fully understand if you don't know where um, the thing comes from, the context, and so forth. So, again, I wish you a great weekend ahead.